So really, really warm welcome to everybody who's joining us this morning. We're really delighted. We've got a fantastic panel, fantastic sort of event lined up for you this morning. And we're really delighted that people have joined us. I think we're going to have a really sort of fruitful and interesting time. So my name's Jo Broadwood and I'm the Chief Exec of Belong, the Cohesion and Integration Network, and we're hosting this One Team event. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context before I introduce our first speaker, Kim Leadbeater. I think, you know, we're living in very divisive times. We've been through a lot of challenging times recently. There's proliferation through social media of division around narratives and identities. And we've faced a succession of crises, from the pandemic to the current cost of living crisis. And I think all those things have just served to emphasize just how important the resilience of our communities is. And I think, you know, social cohesion work is absolutely vital. It's like that social glue that you only notice when it's not absent, when it's absent. And that work supports the development of social capital, which is really fundamental to individual and community well-being and even to economic well-being. And that's why one of the things that Belong is really advocating for is that social cohesion, our connections, our social relationships with each other should be seen as a foundational policy that's really important in terms of, you know, lots of other important outcomes around health and well-being, around tackling loneliness, around looking at kind of community safety and looking at our local economies. And we believe that social cohesion, our social relations with each other, are everybody's responsibility. We're all part of that social fabric, the strength of which can be decisive for the well-being of communities and individuals. And we all have a responsibility to build and maintain the relationships, connections and understandings which make up that kind of important social glue. So cohesion is very much a shared objective for us, in which every person, every neighbourhood and every organisation has a role to play. And sport in particular has such a potentially powerful role to play on this agenda. It provides such a fantastic opportunity to bring people together in ways that create strong social bonds and trust between individuals and groups. And we've had really important reminders in recent years that structural inequalities and racism remain really prevalent in sport, and there's much more anti-racism work and anti-discrimination work that we need to do in sport to tackle that. But sport at its best has this really unique power to bring us together in those shared experiences that help to break down barriers and challenge some of those ingrained prejudices. And at Belong, we've been working with a whole collection of sports organisations, sports for development organisations, over the last 2 or 3 years. And we know that a lot of sports programmes are playing an absolutely vital role in strengthening inclusion and cohesion in their local areas. And we're really lucky to have some fantastic examples with us this morning that we're going to hear about shortly. So with the support of Spirit of 2012, we've got Ruth Hollis here from Spirit this morning, who's chairing a panel, and Sport England, Belong developed the Power of Sport Toolkit, which is a free-to-use digital resource that provides a kind of step-by-step guide to help practitioners and funders design sports programmes so that they really maximise their cohesion impact. And we'll be sharing a little bit more about that today as well. In order to build on that work, we developed a community of practice, which we're really pleased that Mark Lowry, one of our speakers today, chairs for Belong, with a small group of key sectoral partners and Belong founding members. And this group is really leading the Cohesion and Stronger Communities element of the Sport for Development Coalition's Open Goal Advocacy Framework, which we'll hear more about later. We're also looking to develop the skills, the capacity and the confidence across the sector to really understand how best to maximise that kind of positive impact that sport and physical activity programs can have on social cohesion. So this is a really brilliant opportunity this morning to showcase the great work that's already going on in the sector, but also to kind of build on it and think about how can we really sort of build out this work so that all together we're really advocating for our social relations and our connections, particularly across difference, to sort of strengthen our social fabric. So we've got over 160 people on this call, which is a fantastic response. And we've got lots of people online this morning and a really packed agenda. And we're going to try and fit some time in to take questions in the final sessions, and we'll open up to a Q&A there. We've also got a kind of poll at the end, which is about a kind of call to action. What more do we need to do in order to really support this work going forward? But if you don't have a chance to make a comment or ask a question, then please just get in touch with us at Belong and we'll get back to you. We very much see this as the start of a conversation about this work, not the end. So thank you everybody for being here, and a really big thank you to all of our speakers and to everyone who's helped make this happen. So first up, we're going to hear from the brilliant Kim Leadbeater, MP, who's been the MP for Batley and Spen since 2021, although that does feel like a very long time ago now, Kim, I'm sure you'll agree. Kim has a background in sport and physical activity. She graduated with a first-class degree in health-related exercise and fitness, and later set up her own business as a personal trainer, well-being coach, and group exercise instructor. So she's got lots of very practical experience in this on this agenda. She's also the chair of the APPG on sport and a really brilliant advocate for the sector and the work of many of the organisations with us this morning. And also, obviously, because of your sort of personal history, being the sister of Jo Cox, you've also got a really deep understanding of the importance of social cohesion and the need for all of us to continue to work to build strong and cohesive communities. So I'm really, really delighted that Kim's been able to join us this morning. Over to you, Kim.
Oh, thank you so much, Jo, for that introduction, and thank you for doing this really important event. It's going to be hard for me to keep this to 10 minutes because you're talking about so many things that I believe in passionately and I think are incredibly important to our society and to where we find ourselves as a country today. So thank you for doing it, and thank you everybody for joining. As has been said, I'm Kim Leadbeater. I'm the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, and I've been doing that job for now just for over 2 years. But before my life as an MP, which still feels a bit bonkers to say if I'm quite honest, I did quite a lot of other things with my life, not least of all in the context of today's sessions. I worked for over 10 years in health, fitness, sport, wellbeing, and that industry. I was a lecturer in physical activity and health and wellbeing, having done, as Jo said, my degree in health-related exercise and fitness. I ran my own business, teaching exercise classes, cheesy 80s aerobics, boxercise, a little bit of everything. And so I did all that. And generally that taught me that whatever the question is, sport and physical activity is often the answer. And it provides us with lots of solutions to lots of different problems and questions. And one of the best things about sport, physical activity and exercise is that there is something for everyone, which is why it also lends itself really well to work around working with different communities and the cohesion agenda. And the power of sport and physical activity for me is multiplicity. Is that a word? I'm not even sure it is, but there's lots of benefits. So you've got the physical health benefits. You've got mental health benefits, which again, we talk about a lot more now, which is brilliant. But you've also got the social health and wellbeing benefits. And that's something we probably don't talk about enough. And that's why today is so important. It can't be underestimated, the impact that sport and physical activity can have on social connection and wellbeing. So as well as my career working in sport and fitness, I was also a member of a local hockey team for 30 years. So on a weekend, I would also benefit on a very personal level from the power of sport to bring people together. And, you know, we were a hockey team full of women from all different backgrounds with all different things going on in our lives. But every Saturday afternoon, we got on that pitch and we came together as a team with that shared goal, that shared vision of winning. And, you know, it brought us together in a very special way. And actually, the pitch was one side of that, but the pub afterwards was equally as important in terms of the chatting and the conversations and the things that happened at that level as well. So I'm going to try and break down my talk into 3 different sections, which is essentially the 3 different chapters of my life, I suppose. as I've said already, my previous career for over a decade was working in health, fitness, and well-being. My degree is in health-related exercise and fitness. And one thing that I would say, this is one of the things to think about today, I guess, in the work that everybody out there does, is the language that we use. There is a difference between sport, physical activity, and exercise. And I think sometimes it's quite important to talk about those differences, because sport can be a word that puts some people off, and because they think about competition. And we've always got to be making clear to people, sport is not just about competing. It's about physical activity that can be non-competitive. I was quite unusual in that I played hockey and was very competitive. However, I also did lots of recreational physical activity. So I loved doing exercise classes where there wasn't a competitive element. I like walking. I like various different things. And I think it's really important that we get across to people that this isn't just about competitive sport. It's about lots of other ways of being physically active, and talking about movement as well as sport. So I think the language that we use, depending on the people that we're trying to target, is important and does matter. During my teaching career at that time, I was a lecturer at 2 local colleges, so at Bradford College and at Kirklees College. And I think the good thing there, teaching on fitness courses and sport courses, was that you naturally got a very diverse mix of students. And again, that was, I think, really personified how sport does bring people together from all different backgrounds, even those who want to study it and want to work in it. It is a very diverse sector by its very nature. And I think the other thing to point out in terms of sort of the cohesion agenda is that, sport, physical activity, exercise is fun, and it should be fun. And we really need to focus on that. So I would always try and avoid going down the sort of high intensity kind of hardcore sport agenda if our objective is to bring people together. So it's kind of working out, what works for the different communities that we're working with. I mean, I used to talk a lot about, my class has been fun to attend, and it was almost, the expression I used to use was physical activity by stealth. Because if you're having a good time, you don't realize you're jumping around and being really, healthy as well. You kind of focus on the other aspects of it as well. And the social side of that is really important. So I suppose that's my big first message when it comes to the sport and cohesion agenda, is taking that very holistic approach, looking at physical activity, looking at exercise, looking at the mental health side of things, the physical side and the social connection side of it. So that was kind of my life up to 2016, focusing on healthy people. And in 2016, as Jo said, my sister Jo Cox, who was the then MP for Batley and Spen, was murdered just down the road from where we live by someone with right-wing extremist views. And obviously on that day, my life changed forever. And everything that you think you know and you understand when something so utterly horrific happens is just shattered. But we took the very clear decision as a family that we wanted to try and focus on how Jo lived and not on how she died. We wanted to focus on her values and the things that she believed in. And we tried to create a very powerful legacy for Jo by bringing people together, bringing communities together, and celebrating the diversity that exists within our communities and within our country. And we did that, and I did that in 2 different ways. One was at a very local level through the More in Common group that we set up, which is a group of volunteers from all different backgrounds who didn't want Jo's murder to divide our community. And there were people who would use it to do that, and we didn't want that. So we showed what often happens in tragic circumstances. We showed the best of humanity, and we united to bring people together. At a national level, we set up the Jo Cox Foundation, which was one of the ways of building on the work that Jo had started on a number of issues, including work on loneliness and isolation, which again is another really powerful part, I think, of this conversation when it comes to the power of sport to bring people together and tackle loneliness and social isolation. And we launched the Great Get Together campaign, which we do every year on what would have been Jo's birthday in June. And that was the kind of crystallization of this idea of bringing people together in communities up and down the country. And I'm really pleased that, over 7 years down the line, the Great Get Together is still going strong every June, very generously funded by the Spirit of 2012, who are on the call today. So thank you for everything that you did there. Because, at that point, we were a charity, probably like lots of people on this call, and we know how hard it is raising money and getting funds and all the rest of it. So, I'm very grateful for everybody who supported that work at that time, including Spirit of 2012. And I suppose what we did there with the Great Get Together in particular and with the local work was look at ways how we could bring people together from different backgrounds across those lines of difference. And I guess my work moved a little bit from physical activity by stealth to cohesion by stealth. And I think that's one of the best ways of approaching this work. Again, based on my experience, if you label something an interfaith event, a cohesion event, an integration event, you're kind of off to a loser from the start, because it does turn people off. That language can turn people off, particularly people we're trying to reach. If you want to get the usual faith leaders in the room to talk about interfaith work and cohesion, then that's fine. But that isn't where the challenge lies, is it? You know, and I've sat in a number of meetings where we are essentially talking to ourselves and preaching to the converted, and we have to move beyond that. So we have to find different ways of doing that. So what we did with the Great Get Together and the More in Common group was look at different ways of doing that. And we did it in a variety of different ways. Music is always a good one. Food is always good. Cake particularly brings people to events. And obviously, given my background, sport, physical activity is a really natural place for me to start. And if you've got people with a shared goal, with a shared vision, the differences don't matter, they become incidental, but they also, we also create opportunities for people to have conversations that they might never have had under any other circumstances. And that's what the Great Get Together was about. That's what some of the events that we did locally was about. So if I give you just a couple of examples, a couple of amazing people who were friendly with Joe set up the Run for Joe. And we do this run in the local park at Oakwell Hall in Birstall. And it isn't about running. It's about people coming together. They said at the time, you know, we did the first one, shall we have a clock? Shall we have a timer? And I said, absolutely not. I don't care how long it takes people to get around this run. You know, it's about the experience that they have of coming together and being part of something really special. To remember Joe, of course, but actually to celebrate our community and to celebrate the diversity within our community. I go on stage and do a very cheesy 80s aerobics warm-up, gets everybody in the mood, and then we do these runs through the woods. And we make it very inclusive. So we do a 2.5 kilometre fun run for children, and you can walk, it's fine. You can walk your dog round. We do a 6.5 kilometre sort of cross-country run, which I have to be honest is quite physically challenging. But again, you don't have to run it all. You can walk it, you can chat to your friends on the way around. And then afterwards, we have some entertainment, we have some music, and we have some stalls and things. And it's just a really good community day. So the run is sort of there in the middle of it, but there's everything else going around it. And I think that's the really important message there. Another thing that we did, and we still do on an annual basis, we do a local rugby match in Joe's memory. Batley Bulldogs is my local rugby league team. They're an amazing community club, but they struggle to get a more diverse audience in. And we use the Joe Cox Memorial Game as a way of trying to do that. Another event that we did in the aftermath of Joe's murder was a community iftar. So we did an iftar. And what happened was people who met at the iftar in the town centre event that we did, then came to the rugby. So I was sat next to one of the imams at the rugby, and he had absolutely no idea what was going on. He'd never been to a rugby match in his life, but it was that really powerful shared experience of people from different backgrounds coming together with sport at the heart of it. So there are a couple of good examples of things, I guess, that we've done. The other thing that, and this wasn't set up by us, it was set up by a guy who never even met Joe, is the Joe Cox Way Bike Ride. And this was a businessman from North Yorkshire, Safraz, who'd never met Joe, but he was just utterly distraught by what had happened. And he wanted to do something positive. So he got together with a bunch of his friends and he organised a bike ride from West Yorkshire to London to reenact Joe's parliamentary journey. And I found out about this event not long afterwards. I said, this is amazing. Who is this guy? What's he doing? So we met and had a cup of tea and we really hit it off. And I believed in everything he was saying and he wanted to support us as a family and do something good. And that ride has grown year on year. And this year, we had 80 cyclists cycle from West Yorkshire to London over 4.5 days. And it is the most diverse bunch of people you will ever come across, all on bikes, all with that shared goal of getting to London, not falling off, and all those other things. And the connections that take place within that ride are extremely powerful. Our youngest cyclist has been 15, our eldest has been 74. We've got people from all different backgrounds, shapes, sizes, races, religions, socioeconomic groups, everything you can think about comes together in that ride. And we have that shared vision of getting to London. So yes, it's about the cycling and that it is a hard ride, but it's about so much more than that. And I think that's a really good example of another event where we can bring people together. And it's just those conversations that take place with people that you might never have met under any other circumstances before. I'm also really pleased that in Batley and Spen, we've got some really good examples of brilliant practice. I'm not sure if she's on the call today, but we've got the brilliant Rashida Salou from Ready Steady Active. Rashida works extremely hard in our communities on a range of different sports, whether it's football, rounders, tennis, to bring people together from different communities to take part in physical activity. So there are some excellent examples of good practice, indeed, across the country. I know there are. So just to finish off, my latest chapter of my life, I guess now, is a member of Parliament. And what I've tried to do in this role is bring together that life experience that I've got right back from those days when I was teaching. And I used to say to my students, wouldn't it be great if we had a government who understood the power of physical activity and sport? Wouldn't it be great if we had a government who could put this at the heart of policy, and they could put the well-being of the country at the heart of governing? And now I find myself in this position, and I think, well, this is my opportunity. So I do a number of things around the health and wellbeing agenda. I chair the APPG for sport. I also co-chair the APPG for loneliness and connected communities. So I'm trying to bring all these things together. I play on the women's parliamentary football team, badly, but that's a good example of women working in a stressful environment from all different backgrounds, all different ages, just coming together for that 1 hour a week, the training session that I go to, and forgetting those differences and focusing on that common goal and vision again. I've tried to do things with as many different sports as possible. I held a rounders session down in Westminster last week with England Rounders, who were about to celebrate their 80th anniversary. I've been to canoeing sessions, kayaking sessions, everything that you can possibly think of. And just using my role as the chair of the APPG for sport and as a member of Parliament to showcase the power of sport. In March this year, I produced my Healthy Britain report, which really looks at, if we were lucky enough to get a Labour government, how we can embed health and wellbeing policy across government, because that's the other thing that has to change. We have to be looking at health and wellbeing across government departments, whether it's transport, housing, of course, health, education has got a massive role to play. Big passion for me in terms of PE on the curriculum, because when you get kids doing PE together, again, none of the differences matter. They're just kids. So I did that in March. I followed it up a couple of weeks ago with a summit in Westminster called Healthy Britain again, with Wes Streeting, our Shadow Health Secretary, and with Sir Michael Marmot, who obviously takes an amazing view around inequalities and health. And he was just fantastic. I mean, he must be so frustrated because he's been going on about this stuff since 2010, I think, is when the Marmot Review came out. So I'm trying to do a lot as much as I can in Parliament in Westminster. I'm still trying to do as much as I can within our communities. And I am so grateful for people who are on this call today who are doing that really important work, whether that is through a national organisation like Youth Sport Trust or Sport England. You know, you are doing the really important work sort of at national level, but then for every single person who is out there in communities doing work around sport and physical activity and the power that it has to bring people together, we all have to work together on this really important agenda. And I think it needs that national political leadership, but it also needs that really powerful grassroots work to keep going, because it is so, so important. So thank you for everything that you do, and know that, you know, I am there with you every step of the way.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim. That was so inspiring and brilliant to hear how you're doing that work of connecting up in Parliament between those different agendas. I'm slightly regretting not having asked you to open up the session by leading an 80s cheesy warm-up, because I'd have really enjoyed that. But are you able to stay with us for the panel discussion that Ruth Hollis will be leading in 10 minutes' time?
Have to go, sadly.
Okay.
I will catch up with Ruth at some point, and
okay.
Yeah, have a great rest of the conference.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to hear more about Kim's Healthy Britain report, Kim's going to be at Belong's National Conference in November, so please sign up for it. As well as Kim, we've got an absolutely fantastic lineup of speakers. So thanks so much, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So Kim did gave us lots of great examples of programs that are really kind of developing those sort of social connections across difference. And one of the programs that we really wanted to showcase is the fantastic Breaking Boundaries program. And here to talk to us about this is Jenny Jordan from Youth Sport Trust. Over to you, Jenny.
Good morning. Thanks, Jo. My name is Jenny Jordan. I'm Development Manager for the Youth Sport Trust, and as lead partners alongside Sporting Equals, I manage the Breaking Boundaries programme that was funded by Spirit of 2012. So Breaking Boundaries was about using cricket and multi-sport as a tool to bring different communities together to socially mix across targeted wards in 5 cities. It was hosted by local authorities. It was led by a community coordinator who was a young person working alongside cohesion teams, and its aim was to reduce tensions and parallel lives, working with young people aged 14 to 25 called community champions and their families to co-design and deliver regular activity sessions between different community groups, such as faith centres, schools, sports clubs, youth clubs, etc. So what I'm going to do now is just share a VT with you that brings to life the project, its impact, and allows you to hear from some of the young people involved and their lived experiences.
Sport has an almost unique power, I think, to bring people together around a shared purpose and a shared love.
A lot of the times there are barriers like cultural differences, religious differences.
Essentially, we've used sport and cricket as a conduit to bring different groups together that we knew existed in the area but didn't necessarily socialise with one another.
So we've brought together school pupils and refugees and their families.
It's about sessions that we can further develop and put people in the room that otherwise wouldn't be having the conversation, and then they as a group can come up with reasonable reactions to some of the tensions and issues on the ground.
That community cohesion coming together. We see friendships being made, which is very important as well, and also that trust in relationship that we're building.
We've broken down stereotypes within the local area. We've managed to address some of the issues that we have around here for young people. And I think the main thing that we've managed to do is engage them.
Different religions and backgrounds and the ways that they do things have helped others learn new ways to approach things in life.
As a participant, I'd say I never really used to talk to anyone. I was really shy and stuff. So what surprised me as more of a community leader or champion, you'd say, is that everyone's more willing to talk than they seem to be. And so because of that now, I've talked to everyone here, I'd say, and I know a lot of different things about them.
The key change I've seen as part of this project is really helping community groups come together and exist and coexist with each other and thrive.
I didn't just learn how to play football, I learned how to become a better person, help my mental health and other stuff like that.
I think projects that put young people in the lead, that invest in their skills and their development, will give them experiences that they can take way beyond the project.
We're going to be working closely with them over the next 12 months to 2 years, offering them various different CPDs and courses such as first aid, safeguarding, with a view to getting them into some kind of employment in the future.
So hopefully that gave you a bit of an overview on the programme. This slide is just a visual for you to have in your head, really, because you're going to hear from colleagues and partners speaking in the next session about the design, the impact and the learnings from this programme. You know, how we move from national management to local ownership. Working in partnership meant sharing power and resources between people, building that trust and capacity. But most importantly, the co-design and youth voice that really was the driver of this programme to move from a sport focus to more of a cohesion-centred model, creating that sense of belonging across communities. So thank you for listening. I'm on all day. I will be around in the Q&A session if anyone has any questions later on.
Thanks so much. And it's over to Ruth now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jenny. It's lovely to be taken back to Breaking Boundaries. It's a project that Spirit funded for 4 years. It finished earlier this year, so to go back to it, it's quite emotional actually to see that video again after a while. So my name's Ruth Hollis. I'm Chief Executive of Spirit of 2012. You've heard Spirit mentioned a few times already this morning, which is brilliant. Spirit is the London 2012 Legacy Funder, and we exist to use sport and physical activity, volunteering, events and arts and culture to bring people together to improve well-being of communities and individuals. And a really key part of that is developing social cohesion and helping projects really intentionally bring people together. I don't think we could have had a better introduction to the morning than we did from Kim. And while she was talking about physical activity and fitness by stealth, actually cohesion and bridging and bonding needs to happen really intentionally. So I'm delighted to have a fantastic panel this morning. We are going to be talking about place-based theories of change and how you start to unpick cohesion related measures. So on the panel, we've got Tahir from Active Bradford, who's going to be talking, Yorkshire Sport, who's going to be talking about working in Bradford. Julie from the Youth Sport Trust, she's head of inclusion and developed and designed a lot of the Breaking Boundaries work, and Simon, who was the evaluator on Breaking Boundaries. But first, I'm going to pass back to Joe, who's going to give us a short presentation on the Power of Sport toolkit and start to talk about some of that theory of change work that they've been developing.
Thanks so much, Ruth, and sorry you have me again. It was actually supposed to be Jenny Vine, our Research and Development Manager, but she hasn't been able to be here this morning. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kind of geeky theory bit behind social cohesion and what the kind of factors are that really influence social cohesion in a local place. So Belong, funded by Spirit of 2012 and Sport England, developed a kind of research evidence-based toolkit for sports organizations so that we could sort of support that designing in social cohesion from the very beginning. So first off, what do we mean by social cohesion? Because as Kim said, it's often a kind of confusing term. And I guess the way we think about it is about that social glue. It happens when people from different backgrounds meet, mix and get along. And it's about developing neighbourhoods, workplaces, institutions and social spaces where difference is welcomed and celebrated, and where there's empathy and curiosity about people who are not like me, or not like us. And I think when that happens and we move beyond those narratives of us and them, we kind of move towards ideas of kindness, trust and social cohesion between groups. And a lot of the kind of theory behind this work is based on a lot of kind of really good and sound evidence and research, which is that, if people from different groups come together in the right conditions, then actually it's one of the most powerful ways of reducing prejudice and promoting empathy between different groups. But importantly, you need to know how to do that well, so that you're actually fostering stronger social cohesion rather than inadvertently fostering divisions. So some of the things that are really important, some of the key principles under social cohesion, in terms of social capital, it's really about bridging social capital, which is about those relationships between groups, but also linking social capital, which is, how much groups, people and communities feel a sense of trust in their local government and institutions, and how much voice and power and agency to change things do they have locally. So if you're building both bridging and that sort of linking social capital into your programs, then you're doing the right things. And some of the ways you do that is by tackling prejudice and racism, really encouraging that social mixing between groups, really encouraging active social engagement and volunteering, because another bit of research that we've just done shows a really positive correlation between volunteering and social cohesion, and really kind of developing kind of trust between different groups, but also between groups and kind of local services and local institutions. So this is a very kind of geeky bit of kit, I'm afraid, which is you know, a theory of change for place-based social cohesion, which was developed by Belong in partnership with Professor Dominic Abrams from the Centre for the Study of Group Processes at the University of Kent. He's also Vice Chair of the British Academy and leads on their Cohesive Societies programmes, and is one of the kind of leading kind of international experts actually on social cohesion, but particularly on reducing prejudice and intergroup contact. And the two really important squares in this kind of little diagram are the ones around understanding place and understanding social cohesion. So it's really important to understand your local place, because we know that social cohesion is different in different places. You know, the demographics, the services, the physical geography, history, culture, social hubs, physical connectors, cultural connectors, all make a difference. And then really understanding how much bonding, bridging and linking social capital is in that local place. And so this is the more sort of polished version of that, which is around understanding place, understanding social capital. You can then start to strengthen social cohesion. You can think about what your social cohesion outcomes are, and you can develop really clear action plans to design and properly evaluate your social cohesion outcomes. So the Power of Sport Toolkit, which is available on our website, does exactly that. It takes you through a step-by-step process, theory of change, which is place-based. It helps you to really understand your local place and all the communities and the groups in your place, the people who generally aren't included, and thinking about that, but also thinking about, you know, some of those practical logistical things like transport, you know, where you're asking people to come to, can they get there easily? You know, all of those things can be barriers to people actually getting engaged. And then really thinking about it being accessible and easy to use, that you kind of come out of it at the end with a really kind of applicable action plan, so that you've got clear outcomes and a clear kind of path forward for your programme. So thanks very much for that and the opportunity to present on that. I'll stop the share now, because we've got some sort of real life examples I know that some members of the panel are going to share.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jo. That's a great introduction. And if for those of you on the call, if you haven't had a look at the Power of Sport Toolkit, it's a really simple but complex and very accessible way into looking at developing a theory of change and developing your thinking around social cohesion and sport, but also applicable wider than sport. So if you're doing volunteering or arts and culture projects, there's also things in it for you. So do have a look at it. We're going to turn to the panelists now, and we've asked each of them to give us a kind of 3-minute introduction to the work they do, response to what they've heard already. So we'll start with Tahir Akram. Tahir leads Bradford's active Bradford Partnership, which works really closely with Bradford Council and other local organisations. So Tahir is going to speak a little bit about government and local services and their perspective on cohesion, and may touch on some of the work they've done to centre anti-racism in their work, particularly following what happened at Yorkshire Cricket Club. So Tahir, you've each got 3 minutes, panellists, so not long, but please tell us about Bradford.
Thanks, Ruth, and morning, everyone. Yeah, so you were right. I do work for Yorkshire Sport Foundation. So we are an active partnership, and our role, I suppose, is we cover South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire, and we work across three levels really. So sub-regionally, work across sort of place, and then more of that neighbourhood work as well. But within our 9 districts across South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire, Bradford is one of them, and I'm that development manager. So for our district activity partnership in Bradford, it is Active Bradford. And it's essentially, like you said, it's just a multi-agency partnership. Anyone who's got a vested interest of getting people physically active. So a part of that is the council as well. We are also lucky to have a local delivery pilot in Bradford. So there's 12 of those in the country who are funded by Sport England, and our local delivery pilot is called Jump, Join Us, Move, Play. So they're essentially the delivery arm for Active Bradford, if you will, and they do a lot of the doing for us. And a lot of that place-based working. So some of the stuff that they've done, for example, is they've really worked. So all the core designing, core producing with the community is really getting that community buy-in. So one of the things that they did was it's a park now, but it wasn't before. So it was essentially just like it was a mess. That's the nicest way to put it. It was just a mess. So they went away and it's a nice green place now for kids to be physically active, and they've designed it themselves, and it's really bouncing and it's really, really good now. One of the other things that we've really worked well and closely with since I've been in my role at Active Bradford is that strategic piece, and that's been we've had council involved, we've had public health involved, Jump will obviously be involved as well, and Yorkshire Sport as well, and that has really got us to a point now where we've got a strategy which has got tackling inequalities at the heart of it, which sits really nicely with this conversation. Just sort of looking at some of the programs that we've delivered and tackle this, I think is Tackling Inequalities Fund was a funding pot that was given by Sport England to active partnerships and other national charities as well. And I recently visited one in Saltaire in Bradford, and it's a dragon boat. Yorkshire Sharks ran it, but it was essentially a dragon boats project, and it was really good because it had people from all over the district, all over the world, and English was a second language there. And it was a real great example of how sport unites people from all over the world, and it has that real power to make change. I know I've only got 3 minutes, so I'm going to quickly touch on the anti-racism stuff as well. So obviously everyone has heard, or if you haven't, I don't know where you've been, about the Yorkshire cricket scandal around Azeem Rafiq. So that was something we, as an active partnership, really wanted to stand up, because too often we can put a statement and it's gone and it's finished. So there was a conversation around the other 2 active partnerships across Yorkshire. So even though we're called Yorkshire Sport, we don't cover the whole of Yorkshire. It's just South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire. So we had Active Humber and North Yorkshire Sport as well get together, and it was where we could, and we created the anti-racism Yorkshire and Humber group, and we've had pledges, we've had groups come along. So it's essentially anything. It can be councils, football clubs, county FAs, to real community groups. So it was getting a buy-in from across the district, just to sort of understand and get a real, as though you're making a change, because too often, like I said, everyone can put a statement on it and it's gone. And then on the back of that, we've obviously had the ECB report, which came out as well, which was, I mean, in all honesty, it could have been any sport. You know, there's racism at different levels, and I suppose the one around Yorkshire Cricket Club sort of highlighted the institutional racism and that systemic racism throughout. But one of the things that came out that I thought was really important was the classism piece, because we're aware of sport, we're aware of racism that happens in sport, both at elite and at grassroots levels, where the classism bit sometimes gets left behind. So I'm really glad that was highlighted. But just going back to the anti-racism pledge, we've had, like I said, we've had over 100 groups sign up to it, and it is something that gives community groups and grassroots clubs an opportunity to be part of a wider group, because it's not easy, but it's highlighted once you're in a sort of elite level. You know, whether it's Yorkshire County Cricket Club or whether it's a football club, it's in the limelight, it's front and centre. Whereas when you're a grassroots club, it's harder. So it was giving them that support mechanism. And then just one final thing, I'm also part of the Inclusion Advisory Group at West Riding County FA, where we've had reports of racism and they've gone through, but we get to a point where we're in a position to charge them, but if no one wants to come forward and actually stand in front of a panel, it's hard to progress that as well. And the police have actually been involved. So what the police did was, when it came to some of our charges that we brought forward from last year, so what would happen is, if a football related charge was brought forward, it would go to a panel and then they'd look at it. Some of those charges could have actually been criminal cases, but as a county FA, they were unaware of that. So it just shows the level of the level of a challenge we've got when it comes to, you know, reporting. I'll stop because I know I've gone over 3 minutes there.
Almost over, not quite. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think we will touch again probably on racism in cricket and sport as we move through the panel. And I know Simon may have some reflections on that. And, you know, thinking back to Breaking Boundaries, when Spirit set out why we wanted to fund a programme, we were, I think, quite naive in setting out that we felt cricket could bring people together, could be a vehicle for social cohesion, without really thinking through necessarily. I mean, this was a long time before the racism in cricket scandal, but thinking from a theory of change perspective, an underlying assumption that it could bring people together, I think, didn't really take account of the racism that was going on and that underlying condition for success that we suddenly found ourselves up against. So on that, I'm going to turn to Julie Robbins. Julie's from Youth Sport Trust, and she led the design and development of the Breaking Boundaries programme. So she's going to talk, I hope, a bit about how they designed and baked in cohesion outcomes to that programme from the outset. So Julie, you've got 3 minutes, please.
Ruth, always challenging 3 minutes to do this. But I also believe the power has a power of sport to unite, but also divide. And I think that's a really interesting example. In terms of how we built cohesion into Breaking Boundaries and how we considered that in the design of the programme, just quickly go through some key things that we did early on. But I want to stress we were supported by lots of experts in that area, including Ted Candle, that actually is an internationally renowned expert in this field. But also it was continuously informed by local people and their learning as we developed the programme. So first and foremost, and I think touches on Joe's point earlier, is actually also having a strong clarity of the purpose you're doing and helping people really understand what community cohesion and social integration actually is. So that was key. Making sure that we were evidence informed, not just by national indicators in terms of choosing our places and our cities and our targeted ward, but also we worked to make sure we got local knowledge, and we went out. Before we started the programme, we had a period of consultation with local people and really starting to understand place and those networks and the needs in those communities. We adopted a strength-based, not deficit approach to our work. And I think this is really important because language is even important, using the words cohesion, integration, polarized communities, community change. That's all negative language, and we need to make sure we're building on assets and building on positivity to bring people forward and being proud of place and where they live and who they are. And it was youth and community led by local people, but with the flexibility and adaptability to grow and develop and respond to local need. But we also chose to invest in individuals and community organisations, coming back to Joe and social capital and making sure we're strengthening that process. But I think that's really important because we did have a focus on young people and make sure we're developing the next generation of inclusive community leaders in this space too. And I think when anyone looks at community development, it's so important that we build on and we build in and not bolt on to existing assets and work. But what were our key challenges and learnings? And they were a lot, but I'm going to focus on 3. First of all, coming back to Joe's point around social capital, we completely underestimated the readiness of that and the networks that were in place to really reach the communities and the individuals we really wanted to engage with, and also the infrastructure of how those organizations and those communities were actually talking to people in power and their local government, people that were able to make those decisions. And I think we had to do an awful lot of work. And I think if you're designing a project, make sure that is really invested in and you understand the readiness appropriately. Co-design and co-production, putting people in power to make the decisions themselves. We did that in our program design, but it's only when we got organizations from different organizations that were from different communities, planning and designing interventions together, taking ownership of those interventions, but actually designing and delivering together, that made the biggest difference, where they shared resources and they took collective leadership. And creating conditions for high quality social mixing. Sport does bring people together, but if you really need to work hard to make sure you help people design the activities, design the spaces where sport or the activities taking place, to create those environments that help people socially interact and mix, and that takes time. So it is the regularity of that as well that is really key. But those are the three things. Make sure you don't underestimate social capital and you keep strengthening it. Secondly is make sure that people co-design and co-produce with each other all the way through the programme. That's the national organisations, but local organisations on the ground. And really thinking what it actually takes to create social mixing in any sort. And I think that's a really key. So I hope that's helpful, Ruth.
That's brilliant, Julie, thank you. And I think particularly that reflection on both the time it takes, but also the really nuanced picture of the place that you're working in is vital. We took a lot of time, and I think Simon will talk about this and I'll pass to him next. We took a lot of time trying to understand the wards at a much deeper level than we have in other programmes. Was it enough to build the picture that we really needed in terms of the infrastructure? We knew a lot about the people. Did we know enough about the infrastructure? And that readiness was kind of two balancing acts for that programme. I'm going to pass to Simon now. Simon from Wave Hill was the evaluator on the programme. He was there from the very beginning. So I spent 4 years embedded in the Breaking Boundaries programme to evaluate it. And he's going to talk to us a bit about the first thing on my notes is some of the challenges of evaluation. And it is challenging, but also it presents real opportunities to get a deep understanding of communities. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Yeah, so I'm here to represent the geeks on the evaluation side. I love all this evaluation stuff, so I'm going to share some things on that. I'm principal consultant at Wave Hill. I had the privilege of leading the Breaking Boundaries evaluation. Had some very interesting conversations over the years with Julie, Jenny, Ruth, Alex, which really helped build our approach. I'm also drawing on experience of being a club secretary of my local cricket club, who have also experienced problems around racism and racist experiences of our club members. And equally, I'm fairly keen on the game of cricket and its administration as well. So what I'm going to talk about this morning, as Ruth outlined, is just a little bit around challenges, some of the evaluation lessons that come from that, and then offer a little bit of guidance from our little position on the mountain overlooking all this about how you might take forward some of those in terms of your own work, because everyone should be evaluating, whether you do it yourself or you involve companies like Wave Hill. But please make sure that you're building in that evaluation as early as possible in your development of your projects. So I suppose that the challenges boil down to the fact that social cohesion can be a very scratchy subject. It's difficult as evaluators to look at, but particularly for those groups that we're working with. The language can be complex, and often all that combines to exacerbate the suspicion and unwillingness to participate in the project, but equally, particularly participate in the evaluation. Why do you need to be asking me questions about these things? So some of the solutions that we identified there, and we incorporated into the Breaking Boundaries work, but equally subsequent work where we've been involved in a range of projects around looking at social connection across different social cohesion. The solutions there are trying as much as you can to ground the measures that you're trying to evaluate the impact or success of the program in the lived experience of those that the program's seeking to work with. Look at ways in which you can offer or facilitate safe engagement. So that could be making careful choices of the settings that you undertake that in, the use of peer research models where you're using the peers of those individuals to help collect the data, but also thinking about some of the topics that you're involved in and thinking around how you develop an understanding of the nuance associated with those. Other ways in which you can do that is work through other trusted advocates to enroll individuals in that evaluation work, but critically is co-produce approaches and questions wherever possible, so that it's being driven and that there's agency for the communities that you're working with in terms of the evaluation work you're taking forward. In terms of the lessons that come out of this for evaluation is never underestimate the challenge and complexity of these issues, and try to co-produce as early as possible to mitigate these. So you're showing that you're really trying to understand what's going on for those individuals. A mixed method focus, and what that means is trying to combine qualitative and quantitative data collection to build that insight. Try to focus on storytelling and issue-focused conversations. Often those provide the most insight because interviewees can feel much safer talking about these, and then it's up to you working with your peer researchers to interpret some of those things. Particularly link quantitative data collection to lived experience. Try to benchmark questions wherever possible, so you're aligning with existing larger surveys to kind of build a picture of how different this location, these activities, these communities are. But critically, and these, particularly around discrimination, you've got to build in very strong safeguarding processes, because these will reveal things that individuals find very difficult to talk about because of the difficult circumstances that they faced. And therefore you must, from an ethical perspective, build in protections for that. Coming on to the final point in terms of the guidance that we'd offer from our experience on this and lots of other work in this area is try to avoid those direct questions on social connectedness or similar cohesion dimensions. They tend to work less well. Trying to come at them from a slightly more lived experience aspect. And very much as Joe highlighted earlier, try to socialize your data collection, much like you're trying to socialize the physical activity. Think about more informal interviewing approaches or techniques like ripple effects mapping to kind of build a more softer qualitative picture. And then the final point on that side is get out into the communities to build the connection and trust as an evaluator, and try to, in terms of the approach that you adopt there, mirror what the best community workers, the best community coaches do in the way in which they adopt that. Perhaps work shadow them to kind of identify ways in which you can kind of bring that kind of softer, more social approach to that data collection. So that's just a kind of a very brief overview of work since 2018 on breaking boundaries. Captures a little bit, but equally I'm here for the rest of the panel, so happy to take questions and clarify anything that anybody might have on that.
Great, thank you, Simon. A kind of whistle-stop tour, but very rich in terms of the kind of depth you've just given us, so thank you very much. We are running slightly up against 11 o'clock, but what we will do is just carry on for a few minutes afterwards. So we have got a question that's come up asking Simon to share any examples, but what I want to do first, and perhaps we'll come to that last, is one of my reflections on breaking boundaries in terms of the delivery and really getting traction in communities was a switch from taking a very individual focus and focusing on individual beneficiaries to focusing on connecting organisations and building partnerships. And I think that's something that runs through from the kind of design in the programme, also the evaluation, but also the work Tahir has been talking about that he's doing across Yorkshire. So could each of the panellists just very, very quickly give some tips about how we can support and strengthen partnerships at local level to strengthen social cohesion, particularly between sporting and non-sporting organisations, community organisations and physical activity bodies? And perhaps, Joe, I'll come to you first from the Belong perspective, and then to hear Julie and Simon, if you could give very brief top tips on partnerships.
I think certainly from other work that Belong has done, particularly on our social relations during the pandemic, there is a real link between kind of resilient communities and that sort of partnership work. And people have talked about co-production quite a lot. Some of the examples have talked about co-production. And, you know, our learning is that if you co-produce genuinely alongside other communities and organizations locally, then that's one of the most powerful ways of actually kind of maximizing social cohesion outcomes. So I think that's really important. But I was also really struck by something that Julie was saying, that, you know, if the social infrastructure isn't there, then that's hugely difficult, because you don't necessarily then have those formal networks and partnerships to kind of rely on. But I think in some ways, if you go in and you really make the efforts to understand that local place, and, you know, if you go in and you look at, you know, what are the networks that are already there, what are the community organizations that are already there working with some of the communities perhaps that you particularly want to reach or want to work with, and really try to understand that, and then discover that there aren't any, then it gives you some really valuable information about how you're going to have to structure your program, which is that actually 80 to 90% of your program is going to be about engagement. And I think we're not honest enough about that in some ways. You know, we kind of say we're going to go and run this great program, but actually if you're working in a place where the social infrastructure isn't there, or it's really poor, or there's really, really poor social capital, particularly linking and bridging social capital, then some of your initial work is going to be about engagement, and it's about being really clear on what your baseline is.
Great, thank you, Jo. That's really helpful. And I think it also, as well as social infrastructure, speaks to what Tahir was saying about spaces and parks and common places that you can bring people together. So Tahir.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a boring answer, but it comes down to building trust and relationships with people, and it does take time. There's, you know, if you go into a new place and you don't know anyone, you've got to speak to people, understand where those communities get together, because it's not always going to happen in a sports club or a community hub. It might be somewhere else, it might be a reading group, it might be wherever it is. You've got to go and take that time out and spend time with them as well. And it's just getting that understanding. But the other thing as well is, and it just as Jo said, it's you don't need to duplicate the work. Often these networks already exist. It's just spending time finding out, and see with your local partners, they will have those networks. For example, the other thing as well, and I'm apologies, Simon and my data team, they're probably going to just knock me on the head. I'm like, it's not always about data. Data obviously plays a huge part, but it's that local knowledge. It's understanding the place where you are, because that is, you can't always put that on paper. That's how you feel it's a relationship. It's a trust. It comes down to it. So apologies, it is a bit of a boring answer, but it's just spending time with local communities, understanding the place, and growing it as well. And not just an example I've had, I won't name the NGB. I've had an NGB come to me and say, we want to work in this place and we're going to deliver this. You've not done any due diligence, you've not done any research. This community might not even like this. So it's just understanding that. Don't force things onto community groups. Understand the place, see what they want, and talk to them, spend time with them. And it is just that. It does take time. And once you have got those relationships and trust, treat them with respect and value them as well.
Brilliant. That certainly was not a boring answer at all here. It was fantastic. And I think it's a real challenge for national organisations and funders, being so far often away from the places that we're funding, to really understand those local infrastructure conditions, to really understand how much time it takes. And I think a lesson for all of us at that end of the process is around really listening when people are telling us, you know, what the conditions are. Julie and then Simon, very briefly, because we're at 5 past.
Ruth, I think the point that I would make as well is that all these communities will have infrastructures and networks, but actually they don't necessarily collaborate across communities. So I think that's a bit where we have to really think how we build social capital. So it is really important to also then help those communities build that relationship and that network with people in power. So investment in that and not underestimate it is key. I think when you look at relational strength and when you think about those networks, it is what you have said, listening. It's about giving them the space to also share their own interests, but also come together and say, well, what do we have in common and what do we want to drive together? But also sustained action, collaborative action together, so they continue to work together over a period of time is really key. But I think I will always say you've got to have opportunities to review how things are going, but also celebrate those successes at every moment that you can, because success does breed success.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, Simon, obviously it's not all about data, but data does help you understand some of those successes that Julie's talking about and articulate them on a wider level. So is there anything in terms of partnerships you want to finish with?
Sure, thanks, Ruth. Well, I always change people's mind. My pursuit of my career is to change people's mind about data, so I'll keep working hard. Just very quickly, in terms of strengthening partnerships, in terms of what we identified from the evaluation, particularly for breaking boundaries, but other work, I think the key thing is to think hard when you're working with those partnerships about who is round the table, who's involved, who's shaping the agenda, who decided on the agenda, who designed the table in the first instance, because often that could be restricting those that you've got round that table and potentially restricting the impact that partnership could do. And the way in which you develop that is by grounding the development work that you do in local expertise to kind of identify that, to help you answer those questions.
Brilliant, thank you. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. That was an incredibly rich session. I hope it's given participants a real understanding or a kind of way to get into theories of change around social cohesion and how you can use sport. So thank you to Jo for starting us off, and huge thanks to Tahir, Julie and Simon for being part of the panel.
Thanks so much. That was so interesting, and I'm sorry we didn't have a little bit longer, but we've got some exciting things coming up. And thank you to Ruth as well for hosting that event. So we're going to sort of suggest we were kind of planning in a comfort break, but we're running slightly behind time, and we want to make sure that we kind of give you the chance to hear from this fantastic lineup of speakers we've got. So if you do want to take a comfort break, then just pop away from the screen, but come back soon, because the session is being recorded and will be available afterwards, so you won't miss too much. But I hope also that you'll just kind of stick with us and to hear Simon Lansley, who's from the Sport for Development Coalition. We've been working really closely with the Sport for Development Coalition, and it's been a privilege to work in close partnership with them. And Simon's going to talk about the Open Goal Advocacy Framework, and one key element of which is the Stronger Communities and Cohesion strand. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Jo. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great stuff. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the first of all, the Sport for Development Coalition, and we're going to talk about the Open Goal Framework. So some of you may be aware of the coalition. It's a UK-wide movement, and I guess the key thing is that it's about organisations that are generally using sport intentionally to target health and societal inequalities. I'm not going to go through all the slides. I'm very conscious of time, and I know we've got some young people on the panel next, so you should be listening to them, not me. But the key thing here is you look at the bottom, our mission. We believe that sport for development is not being fully maximised. We've got to ask ourselves why and how we can maximise its potential. So here's some of the members of the coalition, and not all of them. So please forgive me if you're not on there, but you can see Belong and Salam Peace down at the bottom there. And really it's how do we come together and take these messages to government, to policymakers, and really make the case for sport for development. And you'll be hearing from our Executive Director, Hitesh Patel, on the panel later. Hitesh joined us last year from DCMS, and the thing Hitesh often says to me is, imagine all the voices coming to government, coming to policymakers, asking for different voices. So what we're trying to do is focus on three areas: impact, so making the case in terms of social and economic contribution this sector is making, providing the evidence. Secondly, the advocacy, So how do we strengthen that relationship between practice and policy? All the amazing programs we're hearing about, how do we bring them together and create that united voice and create that conduit for grassroots and government to transfer knowledge and work together? Finally, we believe this will lead us to create a more enabling environment for investment into the sector, so we can grow the sector and a greater understanding of sport for development. The way we've done this, focusing on advocacy over the last 18 months, and it was initially set up in response to the Levelling Up agenda, is through the Open Goal Shared Advocacy Framework. And we'll share these slides so you can have a read of this and think about it more in greater detail. But essentially what we're saying, there's primary outcomes you can see in the colours there, and there's an interdependency between the outcomes. So when you're thinking about an organisation, I used to work for Street League, for example, which focused on employability skills, but actually they were doing much more than that. They were helping young people stay in education. They were improving health and well-being, sometimes reducing crime and antisocial behaviour, and all of this builds the red area, the social, stronger communities, the social cohesion. So we're saying that interdependency, and we're trying to tell government there are multiple returns on investment and ultimately public cost savings, because many of these interventions are being delivered in communities that are disadvantaged, deprived, underinvested, receiving lack of investment. So how we're doing that is through a series of outputs, not just around the election, but building up to the election next year. There will be policy briefs, etc. And you can see on the right-hand side, Moving for Mental Health, which was produced, led by Mind, one of the members of the coalition, and I think more than 70 coalition members contributed to that. And then late last year, we had Active for Employment. There was 50+ coalition members came together, and soon, relating to the yellow area, we'll be looking later this year, there'll be a policy brief on reducing crime and antisocial behaviour. And then during 2024, we'll be looking at closing the gap in education development. And then obviously we're really excited in 2024 to be looking at strong communities and social cohesion with Belong, and hopefully lots of your organisations. So I guess the message here is today is keep in touch. If your organisation is using sport for development, please join the movement. Go on our website and see the charter, read it, join, no cost. It's just a movement of organisations. We are a small back-end team, as I'm sure Hitesh will touch on at the end. The coalition is about your organisations and what you're doing, how we come together and advocate for sport for development. But thank you very much.
Simon. That was a really great overview, and we're really delighted to be working with the Sport for Development Coalition on kind of progressing this agenda. So I'm not going to spend too long introducing Tim Massey from Sporting Equals, who's going to lead the next session, which is where we get to hear from some of the programs and the first-hand experiences of some of the young people and communities that have experienced the programs themselves. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Jo. Hi there, my name is Tim Massey from Sporting Equals. I'm the National Partnerships Manager. So a little bit about Sporting Equals. We are an independent body that actively works to promote ethnic diversity throughout the sporting community. So we've worked to promote inclusivity through our policy change and community-based engagement. So it's not only vital that we mobilise ethnic diverse communities to become more active in the sport and general physical activity, it's also we looked at the real need to educate the awareness around these communities in order to build that bridge and the current gaps in knowledge in key organisations. We kind of do this across the board, so not only for our grassroots programmes with the likes of the Future Females Leaders Camp projects, which was all about empowering females from ethnically diverse communities to go back to the communities with a coaching qualification and become a role model as a female coach in their communities. Our Leaderboard programme, which is our groundbreaking leadership programme, which aims to campaign to increase the demographic and diversity within board and executive leadership positions. This actually helps ensures that that these boardrooms and NGBs are actually more reflective of the sport and the society we serve. So whilst we're all about campaign and change, we're also here to celebrate as well. So this is done through the achievements of our athletes, coaches and communities in sport and physical activity. And this is done through our Sports and Equals Awards, which will be happening next month. The voting polls are open, so you guys check it out and please take a minute or two just to vote. Brilliant. So today we heard earlier from the amazing Jenny Jordan, Julie and Simon about the Breaking Boundaries program around the design, delivery and the MME side of things. So the aim of this session is to hear about from those who have led and actually participated in the program, which helps bring people from different backgrounds together and build on those communities. So joining us today, we have Azzy and Ejin from the Salam piece, who I'll introduce in a second, and as well as Josh from Edgbaston, from the Edgbaston Foundation. So I'm just going to quickly start with Azzy and Ejin. So guys, please introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what is it you do.
Hi, my name's Azzy from Salam Peace. Started off with the organisation as a participant, age 11, attending football sessions, progressed into volunteering, leadership, and then after I graduated in 2020, started working full-time for Salam Peace. I oversee our staff and volunteers, lead a few projects as well, oversee our school-based programs, and just support the organisation to hopefully, you know, continue to achieve the outcomes that we want to promote amongst our communities.
Hi everyone, my name is Agni. I've kind of been on a similar journey to Azzy. So I started off as a participant, aged 11 or 12, and I carried on from participant to part-time, and now same as Azzy. After I graduated, I became a full-time member of staff and a director at Salam Peace now. So I lead some of the provisions that we do at Salam Peace, as well as looking after some of the admin side, so the payroll, some of the funding applications. Yeah, just a wide range of things.
Sorry, if you could tell us a little bit more about the programs about Salam Peace and some of the wider programs that it runs as well.
Yeah, so I think today I plan to speak specifically about our under-15s football program. Sorry, my webcam has just gone, so I'll just speak from here. As it's quite a powerful example of social cohesion. So program we've been delivering for about 3 years, consisting of weekly football matches and training for teenage boys. We've engaged about 30 throughout, living in Waltham Forest from ethnic minority backgrounds. From that group of 30, I was actually counted today, we've got 21 different nationalities and backgrounds, which I do think is quite impressive. And using football as a vehicle to develop friendships, to meet with people from different backgrounds and dispel negative stereotypes that people may have about certain groups, certain areas, certain schools, through experience. And I think, I don't know, we're short on time, but I think what's been really quite impressive for me as someone leading those programs is that in terms of the actual competitive football as a team over the last 2 years, the group has lost more games than they've won. But the fact that despite that, they still attend, they still participate, and these are teenage boys where dropout rates are really, really high. The fact that they still all attend, participate, even engage in some of our wider activities show that when they attend our programs, that they feel like they're in a family, they feel valued, and they feel connected to something which is much greater than a win, loss or draw on a Saturday at Hackney Marshes.
That's great, thanks for that. We're also joined by Kelly Smith from Access Sport. So Kelly, just take a minute just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about Access Sport and the programs which you deliver.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Access Sport's a national charity, and we kind of work to ensure that no one is kind of excluded from the benefits of community sport. And a core aspect of our work is club development. So we sort of train, equip and support clubs to provide kind of inclusive physical activity for disabled children and young people, and children and young people from underserved communities as well. What I'm really here to do today is to introduce kind of one of our clubs that we've supported in Bristol, which is Tom and Bristol Inclusive Thrill Seekers. Really honoured that he's been able to join us for this panel and talk a little bit about his work and the disability inclusive climbing sessions that they run. But just the last bit from me about kind of Access Sport and what we're doing in this space currently. Sense of belonging and community engagement are kind of two of our core outcomes as a charity. And this year we've undertaken a kind of an evaluation of how clubs within our network create a sense of belonging and community engagement across the sort of cities that we work in. So Bristol, London and Manchester. And Tom, I know, has been a part of that evaluation. So hopefully I can sort of share some of those findings with this group and with the wider sector when we're able to publish them at the end of this year. So just wanted to flag that as well. But yeah, I'll hand over to Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, hi. So yeah, my name's Tom. I'm the director of Bristol Inclusive Thrill Seekers. So we're an adventure sports charity looking to kind of take some of the barriers off of adventure sports, mostly rock climbing though, in Bristol. We've been running for about 5 years, and we run weekly sessions with one-to-one spots for our climbers, all using volunteers from the local community, all long-serving volunteers as well. We've had a lot of people kind of with us from day one, and so the community aspect of our club is super important, and we've been working with Access Sport from the very beginning. And I too have been a participant at Access Sport supported clubs from when I was a child as well.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. We've also got Josh as well from the Edgbaston Foundation. Josh, do you have a minute that we can just introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, hi, I'm Josh, and as Tim said, I'm from the Edgbaston Foundation, so the charity linked with Warwickshire County Cricket Club, and I oversaw a lot of the Birmingham element of the Breaking Boundaries project here in Birmingham.
And I just see Sab, I saw you there as well. Sorry I didn't get a chance to introduce you earlier. Please just take a minute just to introduce yourself as well.
No problem, Tim. There's Agni and Azzy a lot more interesting than I am. Yes, I'm Sab. I set up Salam Peace. Just very quickly, we're beneficiaries of some Sporting Equals programs. You know, one of our young people, she recently completed her qualifications in football, so it's a great benefit. Just quickly, I'll touch on kind of an overriding issue. You know, when I set up Salam Peace, it was on the back of a negative event that happened, London 7/7 bombings, and my inspiration was that, look, you know, we've got more things in common, especially in a diverse country like the UK, than we have differences. But at the time, there was few big agendas. So you had a lot of issues around Muslim communities and extremism. You had a big kind of migration of Eastern European communities, where often them coming into the UK was seen as a negative, as opposed to the richness that they were adding to our society. And also there was a lot of issues still around young black men still being prominent in criminal statistics, and also low achievement in education. So what we tried to do with Salam Peace, and as we evolved over time, was use sport and education, and as he touched on, create a family where people come along and you have something to belong to. And something simple as when we run, say, our female fitness program, where you get 18-year-olds and 65-year-olds training together with all different physical abilities, but the fact that they're all wearing the same t-shirt, they come along, they get greeted by their name. Parallel to them, there'll be 2 other projects running side by side. So it's just creating that family and that atmosphere and that sense of belonging. And I suppose that's always been a passion, and it's good to see. And the fact that we've evolved kind of participants into volunteers, leaders, now directors and leaders of our organisation shows the kind of journey right the way through.
That's great to hear. You spoke about creating a sense of community, and for me that brings about a sense of belonging and purpose as well. Sab, I'm really interested to hear about your journey as well, from being a participant and then the learnings that you've taken actually, then coming back to kind of your journey as well, from a participant to then being involved with Salam Peace as well. So do you mind just like speaking a little bit on that?
Okay, I mean, For myself, it was always kind of what can we do to make a community better? What can we do to get people to buy into their community? And I think, you know, when you've got people that have benefited from the organisation themselves, so Agni, for instance, when she started with me, kind of 10 and a half years ago, on a program that was around bringing people together through fitness and cycling. Now, further down the line, when she led cycling programs, it was very easy for her to keep that spirit and inspire others because she was a beneficiary. And I think sounds a very simple kind of process that, you know, you're passing the torch on and then they carry the torch on, but it does take time, effort, and also that investment in kind of young people and people with sometimes very little qualifications that we develop, and be prepared that there'll be times when things don't go perfect, but in the long run, things will come good. And I suppose that's something that we're very proud of at Savant Peace.
Great to hear. Aggie, I'm really here to like your take on that as well, from seeing it on the ground and, you know, your involvement in the program as well.
Yeah, so as Seb said, I think it was kind of useful to start off as a participant, because, you know, now when you're working with young people, you know the kind of things that they go through, and you know that you're there to kind of support them throughout their kind of journey as they're growing up and they're moving from, you know, being a child to a teenager, all the problems that or issues that they may be going through. You're there as kind of there to speak with them if they need any support or anything like that. I feel like sometimes the only kind of activities they do is go to school and then go home. So having our sports program as like an opportunity for them to meet new people from all the different backgrounds, and kind of also have us as like a source of advice, I guess, or just a person that they can talk to, I feel like is useful for them. Yeah.
Thanks for that. So one last question. This is going to be for Tom and Josh. So you guys have both been embedded like quite closely in the community in which you guys are serving as well, and the programs which you delivered. It'd be great to hear, like, what would you say is like the biggest challenges that you both personally have kind of seen from your programs involved, and how did you guys kind of overcome that by using like a more community-centered focused approach?
I am probably not the best person to answer this. I've not really seen too like big challenges when it comes to the community. It's been something that has come with very few barriers. I think actually most people aren't adverse to getting involved in their community. I think putting the opportunities out there, they tend to fill themselves. You know, we have a really high demand for volunteers and for participants. We've been really lucky. I don't know if your experience has been the same, Josh, but actually in terms of, you know, creating that community, it's not something that you have to work hard to do. I think it's something that as long as you can kind of take the barriers off, it kind of all flows itself. You know, you just get to watch it happen.
Yeah, I think we in Birmingham here, we faced a few challenges throughout the Breaking Boundaries program that we tended to overcome, which was a great thing. But a lot of the challenges, well, some stemmed from the dreaded P word, which is pandemic, which luckily hasn't been mentioned loads on this call, which is good. But obviously that brought about a lot of issues in terms of community groups getting restarted with their projects they were doing, and actually having service users come to use their facilities, their groups. So that brought a challenge in itself, because things were slow to get up and running following the pandemic. And then something that a lot of people touched on earlier is that level of trust as well. So here at the Edgbaston Foundation, we had a bit of staff turnover. So I came into the Breaking Boundaries project in the last kind of 6 to 8 months of it. So relationships had already been developed with people from the foundation that then moved on. So it was about me developing that trust with the community groups and people in the community. And the way to overcome that was, I think, as we said earlier, was to get out to those communities and not here I'm based at Edgbaston Stadium, which to a lot of people can seem a bit inaccessible. So for me, it was about opening up the doors to the stadium, allowing people to come in, seeing how they could utilise it, but also ourselves as a foundation getting out to those communities that needed it most, and to actually talk to them, find out what their needs were, and then see how we as a foundation and with the Breaking Boundaries programme could hit those needs. And that's a key for me. That's been one of the legacies of the programme as well, is that we've managed to keep those relationships with community groups going forward, and we interact with those on a regular basis now, and we use them for activities that we do. We get them involved in activities we do here at the stadium. So that was some of the challenges and how we overcome them. Yeah.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation in this. We're going to head over now to our next showcase section, which is going to be about the London Together programme, of which Salam Peace were actually one of the participants. So I'm going to hand over to Neil Sood from Comic Relief and Lauren Krishna from the Greater London Authority to talk about the London Together.
Thanks, everyone. Just bear with me. I will share some slides with you as well. Oh, bear with me. Just forget about the sound and video bit. I'm going to need, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Great, here we go. So hi, yes, I'm delighted to be speaking today. Just briefly going to introduce London Together, which is a joint effort between Greater London Authority and Comic Relief. So I'm Neil, I lead the Sport for Change work at Comic Relief, and I'll let Lauren introduce herself.
Hi, my name's Lauren Kosher. I head up the Mayor of London's sport team. And as Neil said, we're going to be talking about our London Together partnership, which was a £3 million partnership between the Mayor of London and Comic Relief. We've got quite a short amount of time, I know, so I'll try and be brief, but obviously please do get in touch with us if you want any more information about this and our other work after. So I'll give you a little bit of background about my team and our work first. So the focus of our work is sport for social outcomes through our Sport Unites programme. The Sport Unites programme began in 2018 and it delivers against the current Mayor's Sport for All of Us strategy. It moves away from simply participating in sports, which was our previous focus, to using sport for particular social outcomes, such as supporting young people affected by violence, mental health and wellbeing, and of course, specifically sport for social integration and to build stronger communities. So for us, inclusion and social integration is extremely important to all of the work that we're doing. At the GLA, our remit is London, which is huge and densely populated, as I'm sure you all know, 33-ish boroughs with nearly 9 million people. So all of those people and communities have got different needs, different access to facilities and different goals. And for us, it's really essential to be innovative in the way that we reach and engage Londoners in all of those areas. Next slide, please. I feel like I shouldn't say pandemic, should I? I feel like I'm on one of those pandemic. Let's not talk about that. Those briefings. Okay, so for us, the London Together programme was a key element of phase 1 of Sport Unites and continued into phase 2. And there were quite a few reasons that London Together was so important to us. First of all, it was a great opportunity to work closely with Comic Relief. Our focus and our desired impacts are really clearly aligned. And we truly believe that by working together in this way, we've had a much more significant impact on the sector and the participants than we would if we'd done it separately. And we try and do that much more now, more collaborative funding, collaborative partnerships and long-term partnerships with organisations like Comic Relief. It was really key for us as well to show how sport and physical activity can bring people together, and how sport interventions can have a hugely positive impact on our communities through social integration. It was a long-term project, as I've said, so we could really ensure sustainability of the work and support for the participants. And for us, not only would this open up opportunities for the community sports sector and other funders, but it would also showcase how social integration can improve lives, meaning that potentially more funding and more support will be put into the sector and into sport for social integration in particular. And we've published a report together with the aim of showing other funders what to look for when funding these kinds of approaches and what the ideal elements should be included. One part of this as well, which was really important to us, was the opportunity for shared learning amongst the cohort of grantees. This has paved the way for organisational development and peer learning being built into all of our future funds and projects. It's really key for us now. and definitely something that the GLA didn't do enough of before. So I think this has sort of paved the way for that. And organisations also identified a range of benefits for using sport and physical activity to aid social integration, and I'll let Neil talk more about that in detail. So I'll hand over then to Neil so he can give you a bit more information about the project.
Thanks, Lauren. So just a very brief introduction to our work at Comic Relief. So you might be familiar with some of the other work Comic Relief do. You know, our vision is a just world free from poverty, and some of the sort of non-sport work is really quite well known. But we have invested in sport for change for over 20 years, both here in the UK and internationally. So £80 million worth over 500 projects roughly. And those projects have covered quite a wide range of themes and topics, so ranging from mental health to gender equality to employability. And partnering with the Greater London Authority was the first time we'd ever thought about using sport to tackle social isolation or to build cohesion. So it was really an important project for us as well, to see that vital use of sport that, you know, other people have mentioned. A small bit about London Together. So Laura mentioned it was £3 million over 3 years, and we invested it into 29 projects dotted around quite a lot of London actually. So I think we covered quite a lot of the London boroughs that Laura mentioned. And one of the really pleasing things for us was that, you know, we were able to fund organisations who typically do work in sport. So Sporting Equals, Salam Peace, Access Sport, they're on this call. They're part of London Together programme, but also it was a really good way for us to be able to work with non-sporting organisations who wanted to test the use of sport for themselves and add it to their portfolio. And hopefully I'll be able to show you a video of one such organisation in a minute. The two outcomes around that we've in the middle there, so they were the kind of sort of loose outcomes that we developed for the programme. So strengthening relationships between and within communities, and reducing social isolation. That's something London Together, the Greater London Authority, are quite keen on, the use of sport to do that. So all the projects loosely work towards those outcomes, and yeah, the video will sort of showcase that. And then the collective learning. So Lauren's mentioned that as well. That's something that Comic Relief do quite often in our programme. So we commissioned a learning coordinator to get the funded partners together so they could share learnings, good practice, bad practice, you know, just so that they could, you know, be a network as well. Lauren mentioned also, as part of this learning, we made a report. We had a report commissioned by Infocus, which I'm more than happy to share. So again, it had recommendations for funders as well as practitioners who are on the coalface, as it were, delivering projects. And I can put the link to that in the chat afterwards if people are interested. And hopefully I'm able to showcase this video. So one of the programs that was funded was from an organisation called Maslahah, who work towards improving the image around of Muslim people, kind of similar to Salam Peace, but they typically don't use sport. But they were able to, through London Together, develop a partnership with British Fencing. And I'll let the video do the talking for me. So here we go.
I didn't fit into the mainstream industries where I didn't look like everybody else because the way I dressed, because of what I believed in. I want to give something to them that's not the norm. Communities coming together and finding that they have so much in common. This is not a Muslim girls project anymore. This is just a women's fencing project.
When you have like those friends that you don't see for ages, but when you meet up again, it's nice to catch up with them. It's like nothing has changed.
My mom is at home, she's quite serious. But here, it's like she has a chance to be free as well.
When we fence against one another, it's so much fun. She definitely pulls out secret moves, and so do I.
I'm meeting lots of different women lots of different ages, lots of different backgrounds, and we're learning about each other's cultures and lives.
Certain communities are hard to reach. Have you reached them enough? You have to become part of that community to understand its needs.
Thanks so much, Neil. That was absolutely brilliant. Really fantastic way to end that session. So thanks so much to Neil and Lauren there for telling us about the work of Comic Relief and Greater London Authority. We're going to move quickly to our final panel, and we have to acknowledge that we are running slightly over time. So forgive us, we may run slightly over because we've got a great kind of poll at the end that we just want you all to get involved in. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Mark Lawrie, and who's the Chief Executive of Street Games, one of the UK's leading sport for development charities, and someone it's been a pleasure to work closely with over the last few years, by Hitesh Patel, who is Chief Executive of the Sport for Development Coalition, who we've already heard from, but that's a movement of over 400 organisations and a brilliant facilitator within this sector. So welcome to Hitesh. And Lee Parker, who is the Senior Programmes and Grants Manager at Laureus Sport for Good. Laureus was founded under the patronage of Nelson Mandela and uses sport as a powerful tool to help children and young people overcome violence, discrimination and disadvantage in their lives. And they support over 200 programmes in 40 countries. So in this session, we just want to round off the event by drawing together some of the key thoughts and takeaways about how we can take some of this fantastic work that we've heard about today, how we can take it forward, and really the ambition to do more and to think more about how we can take this agenda forward. And we want to involve people in a poll at the end just to think about what the key priorities should be, and what the challenges and opportunities are when we think about the cohesion impact through sport, and also perhaps to develop a bit of a sense of collective purpose around how we take this forward. So Hitesh, I know that you have to leave us first, so I wonder if the panelists in just 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to ask you to keep yourselves quite brief and concise. You know, what are your thoughts really on what we've heard today, and how we can take this agenda forward from here? So let's hear from you first, Hitesh.
Jo, thank you, and thank you to Andrew and your team for putting on the session today. I've been listening since the start, and it's been a really great sort of set of speakers you've managed to assemble. I guess if this panel discussion is about looking forward, then clearly when we talk about scaling up a lot of the good work that's going on, you know, the greatest enabler is obviously the government. And I know Mark will have his own insights to offer here, but you know, Simon gave a great presentation about the coalition's work and how we operate, and effectively our 3-pillar approach, which is around impact, advocacy and investment. But the bedrock of that is obviously impact. And now a key strand of the work that we're taking forward at the coalition with our membership, but we're also looking at reviewing this alongside key partners, and we're a system partner of Sport England. And as Simon's presentation showed, we're also partners of Laureus and Comic Relief, is just around that impact, because impact is the bedrock. So if people are kind of coming at government with lots of different pieces of evidence and there's no kind of alignment or running thread, then that makes it difficult. You're effectively then competing with each other in the sector. Whereas I think the value of the coalition's network is that kind of scale of impact that we're all working together to achieve. And we were able to demonstrate this to government successfully recently, mainly through an opportunistic approach through the Youth Justice Sports Fund. And that's something that Mark and the Sport and Recreation Alliance Street Games were quite instrumental in, alongside the Alliance of Sport, which is led by James Mapston. And that's a good example of where, you know, you talked about foundational policies earlier, Jo. That's a good example of how, you know, through early intervention, you're making a positive impact on someone's life through the prism of sport physical activity or exercise, which is how Kim kind of split those 3 areas. But you can see by doing that, you're kind of improving the quality of their life. Now, Simon mentioned my background was in government at DCMS. I was a civil servant there, so I'm not political, and the coalition is an apolitical organisation. But one of the kind of strap lines for DCMS when I was there was about improving the quality of life for all. So if someone's being positively impacted, you're improving their life chances, you're improving the prospects for them to go into employment, for them to lead a healthier lifestyle. So further down the line, they're going to be less of a burden on the welfare state or the health service, and they're also contributing to the economy. So it's those multiple returns on investment that we want to try and demonstrate the impact of to government. And why it's timely now is because of the fact that the government's just published its new sports strategy, Get Active. And while this strategy wasn't open to public consultation as it was 8 years ago, you know, I know the government engaged with a number of key stakeholders. You know, we as a national sector partners group of key leaders in the sector spoke to the government a couple of times. And one of the points that I made was around needing to kind of demonstrate what can be achieved through people getting active. So it's not just about participation for participation's sake, it's about what those end goal outputs are. And I think that's quite neatly captured in the one goal, open goal infographic that Simon showcased earlier on. So I'm conscious of time. I'll stop there and sort of allow Mark and Lee to intervene.
That's brilliant, Hitesh. And I think certainly that the thing about kind of speaking with a united voice to government, I think, and particularly talking about outcomes and making that argument for, you know, the role of sport and physical activity is in terms of sort of building that, being a sort of foundational part of leading to other outcomes, I think is really important. Mark, I don't know whether you'd like to talk a little bit about how your thoughts about taking it forward, and perhaps let's move it away from government a bit. You know, there are things that we can all do and things that the sector can do. So could you perhaps talk to us a bit about the things that we can do?
Thanks very much, Jo. Morning, everybody. I'll just say quickly that we were fortunate to be one of the founding members of the Belong Network, and we're really proud of that as an organisation involved with many of the organisations that try and take cohesion in communities forward. It's really important to street games. And we're also a founder member of the coalition, so I'm equally proud of that. So before we spend all my time talking about badges, the other thing I just wanted to say before I reflect on my thoughts on this morning was it's great to see people from right across the UK on this call. So I noticed Kirsty is there from Scottish Sports Futures in Glasgow, and we've got colleagues on the call from Wales, because too often I think we sometimes end up talking about Westminster English policy, and this reaches into communities right across the UK, which for me is really important. I just wanted to reflect on something Kim said about well-being. I think the umbrella for all of the work that goes on in communities, including the work on cohesion and integration, is about well-being. And if you look at it, and I'll talk very quickly about politics, if you look at the Levelling Up missions, the one with the biggest financial return on investment is the improvement of well-being in the country. And I believe that all the organisations who are on this call, who are involved in delivering sport and physical activity in the heart of their communities, are already contributing to the subjective well-being of local people. And as Kim mentioned, in what Labour are talking about in their Healthy Britain report and their intention to put well-being into every policy if they're successful in getting into government, I think us being able to understand how the work that Hitesh touched upon around community safety and criminal justice, the work we've been talking about this morning around cohesion and integration and dealing with those thorny issues in local communities sometimes, all of it connects up to the well-being of the people who live in our local communities. And I'm really struck by the fact that the majority of organisations we work with, we're fortunate to work with around 1,600 amazing community-based organisations, some of whom have already been talking this morning, which is great. What we know with them is that they do this almost without thinking. So they deliver fun, sport and physical activity in the heart of their communities in a way that engenders belonging in young people. And we've launched a report today based on 1,000 young voices and hearing from young people in lower socioeconomic groups. And they talk about the importance of relationships and connections to how they feel when they involve themselves in sport and physical activity. So my final thought is just about the what next. I think as sports, and I talk about that in terms of mainstream sport, governing body sport, we always talk about an 80-20 principle with community organisations. We should spend 80% of our time listening to what community organisations are telling us about what's happening in the neighbourhoods and what's important to the people who live locally, and only 20% of our time talking about how we can support and enable them to do more and do better. So that's the first thing for me, is the 80-20 principle in communities. The second principle, which has come through really strongly this morning, is we're constantly on the seesaw. So we're all constantly aware of the deficits that exist in our communities. The data is there, the issues are there. What actually that I heard this morning that I think community organisations and our approach can be about is the strengths-based approach. We should be talking about the assets that exist in our communities and building upon those. And then the third thing, which is quite deliberately, I think, about cohesion and integration, excuse me, and connectedness, is about learning the language. And I think it's incumbent on all of us in the sports sector to spend more time understanding this. The Power of Sport Toolkit is great for that. Belong's materials are great for that. We know what we're doing instinctively, but we don't fully understand the research backing to it. And we don't understand, as Julie said earlier, some of the language that sits around it. So those are my three for today. And thanks for the invite, Jo.
That's brilliant, Mark. Thank you so much. And Lee, perhaps you could just share your reflections and your thoughts. And then I think we're going to move quite quickly just to getting some views from the audience. So it would be great to hear from you, Lee. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. Thanks for having me. Really insightful session. Just to complement what was said before, there's a lot of crossover learning that has occurred. That's very, very similar to the work that we've done when it comes down to place-based initiatives. So just a bit of a background and context in terms of how Laureus is involved in this type of work with communities. Since 2013, we've been working on place-based initiatives known as Sport for Good Cities, where we work with community groups within a district of a city and provide them with a backbone support and funding to help them work with each other and support their young people in their community. It's also known as a bottom-up approach. And it has, essentially, this is enabling them to dictate what success means to them and also where funding should be going, as opposed to us as a funder dictating where funding should go towards. And this is all thanks to the support from people like the Mayor of London and Nike to bring these free community groups together. In terms of, like, you know, there's been a lot said around kind of like what is needed to make a greater impact within the sector. In terms of building capacity building or infrastructure and what we need, and it's quite a loaded question. And a couple of things that stand out just from today and also from the learning that we've been doing in this work is around giving this type of work time and also funding, not just for the sector to prove that collaborative impact and cohesion related outcomes through that impact works, but also space and funding for the actual delivery of the people to deliver this work to occur. And you know, our work in London, which has been going on for the last 6 years, has been predominantly around improving social cohesion through sport. But the first 2 years, and very similar to the other things that were said today through the Breaking Boundaries program, was, you know, those first 2 years were about building trust within these communities and building a network of groups to not only trust Laureus, but also to trust each other. you know, we had an external evaluation for the program that we're doing, and shown that the program, you know, reached the lives of you know, X amount of children and young people through the programs that were funded with these groups. But there were more telling results of, you know, the amount of time it took to just bring these organizations together, because the trust had been eroded by local government. They've seen other vanity projects come through the community before them, promised the world, and then just shipped off straight after. And then there's also just lack of things like capacity building and training available for these groups that are not appropriate for local contexts. And just a general kind of like lack of well-being for the networks that exist in the community that show what is available, that haven't been kept up to date. So in essence, what's being said here is that there's just a lack of focus on the groups and the people that do the work, to help them be the best that they can be, to reach the people that need the most help. And you know, a few things that were kind of pulled out on top of that was the fact that, yeah, the, you know, theories of change and program design are very much, well, you know, they're very important, you know, to produce this evidence that we want to give to the big strategic funders and the big people at the top to make the changes that we want to see. But there's also an exercise around making it more participatory. So when you go into communities, to make it, you know, have that softer approach, as Simon was mentioning earlier, to make sure that communities feel like they own what success means and can understand what it means to them, and leaving all the jargon and all the research and academic stuff for the people that need to do that, to translate it for appropriate audiences. But ultimately, like, you know, the key takeaway, to just add on what Mark and Hitesh just elaborated on, is around making that collective impact more demonstrable for a business case to policymakers. And you know, we've seen substantial funding announcements for things before in the past, like through Big Society and NCS, talking, you know, a lot of money that, although they make great strides and they have big impact, there just needs to be that bit of a balance of you know, funding initiatives for participation, but also supporting the community groups that do this work, because that's the crucial key to keep that type of work sustainable.
Thanks very much, Lee. I think that's a really good summary. What I'm going to do is we're going to put the polls up now, and then I'll get the panel just to give some final thoughts on the results of the polls. I know, Hitesh, you may have to leave us, but if you are able to stay, that would be great. So we've got some polling questions. The first one is, from what you've heard today, does your organisation already achieve cohesion-related impact? So can we have that poll up, please, Alex? And we can't vote, so that's great. So could we see the result of that poll? Or do we have all the results at the end?
Sorry, we just need a bit longer while we get the results in. Just be a second, and then I'll share them. Yeah, they're not finished yet because we're still voting.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. So that's the first question. From what you've heard today, does your organisation already achieve So, well, yes, 68% say yes, 32% say no. So that's kind of 2/3, a third. So if you answered yes, does this impact form part of your programme objectives, or is it secondary impact? It's something that happens almost by accident. You didn't quite design it in. So if you answered yes, did you design it in? Does it form part of your programme objectives, or is it secondary? And if we can get the results up, Alex, that would be great. So 67%, so that's really interesting. So of those 68% who answered first to the yes question, 67% designed it in, and 33% didn't design it in. And so which of the following would most enable your organisation to have greater cohesion-related impact? So we've got programme design and place-based theories of change, capturing and measuring cohesion-related impact, talking about and making the business case for cohesion-related impact, skills and confidence to work in more divided communities, or access to local partnerships and networks? Which of those would be the most important to you?
Just giving people a second to do that one, Joe. Won't be a second.
Thanks, Alex. And I'm going to come back to you, panelists, just to ask for your thoughts on the results of the polls and what that tells you about what we should be calling for. So 21% on programme design, 14 on measuring, 14 about making the business case, 21 on skills and confidence, and 29 on access to local partnerships and networks, which I think says something about the conversation we were having earlier about social infrastructure and the importance of social infrastructure. So thank you very much for that. And then just one final question. We missed out one because of time. So for us as a sector to achieve much more of this impact, what should our priorities be? Building skills and capacity in programme design and impact measurement, establishment of ongoing programmes and funding streams to support the work, sharing and developing best practice, developing shared impact assessment frameworks, and demonstrating collective impact and making the business case to policymakers and funders. And what I would say is it's quite easy to say we need more funding. And I absolutely agree we need more funding. But there is also, we're up against lots of other people who are also saying we need more funding. So what could help us make the case to say we need more funding? I'd say before you immediately go for B. So if you can just tell us what you think as a sector, what our priorities should be, that would be really helpful. So when you're ready, Alex, let's have the results.
I'll just give people one more second. I think we've got a couple more. Okay, I'll end it now.
Okay, so 21% on building skills and capacity, 12%, only 12% on the funding question, 24% on developing and sharing best practice, 6% on developing shared impact assessment frameworks, and 36% on demonstrating collective impact in order to make the case to funders. So thank you so much for taking part in that. That was really helpful and informative, and we've kind of gathered the information on that. So just in closing, could we just have a minute, just 1 minute from each of our panelists on their reflections on those polls? And we'll go to Hitesh first, I think.
Thanks, Joe. Really, really interesting poll. I guess two responses stood out for me, both in terms of how people responded, but actually the numbers that responded. So I think the key takeaway is the understanding that collective impact can inform making the case, whether that's a business case to government, business case to local authorities, or any other key facilitator or enabler. And then the question before that, I thought it was quite interesting as well, about access to partnerships and networks. And I wanted to just also flag that, because one thing that the coalition will be doing over the coming months is kind of developing our digital platform. And as part of that, we'll be basically giving all of our members the opportunity to list themselves on our website and kind of build a kind of picture across the UK of who's operating where, how they're operating, so that they can make those connections themselves. And I think that will be quite an interesting thing to pursue. And just lastly, I think going back to something that Kim said right at the outset about how different sectors can also play a role here. She referenced how food and music bring people together. And I think there's also something there in terms of learning from other sectors and seeing if there's something there that we can explore. So it's not just sport for development actors and partners that are kind of, looking to make a positive impact on people's lives. It's having a kind of combined shared offer, but demonstrating the collective impact of that.
Thank you so much, Hitesh, and Mark and Lee, just 1 minute each, if I can ask you to keep it really brief. Let's go to Lee first and then Mark. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So yeah, very briefly, I think, it's interesting results from the kind of the first question around, making this type of impact part of primary objectives versus secondary impact. And I think, to be quite honest, and this is where it's important for most funders and people that make decisions to be honest as well and have that transparency. Our primary objectives is the impact on young people, building confidence, fostering friendships, education and employment opportunities through the power of sport. And although we acknowledge positive cohesion related impact on the groups we work with in London, it's still kind of considered a secondary objective because of the way that we are set up. And so we have a bit of work to do to kind of make sure that that's more formalized. And that's something that we're in the process of. And I think that's something which should be seen as a more wider collective objective for organizations that do this type of work and help the people on the ground. So we can actively work on a collective evidence framework and strategy. And then once that is in place, this type of framework will allow us to not only continue to engage with the communities we engage with, but also kind of lets us to substantiate something a bit more quantitatively, with more evidence that goes beyond subjective stuff and assessments that look a bit fluffy in terms of how we communicate the impact of this work, and will kind of provide a more formalized way of showing a social return of investment that makes it more attractive for policy makers to support not just sport for development, but also this type of approach in general. And also to add just to Hitesh's point around, there are other people doing this type of work in different fields outside of sport and sport for development. And there is a lot of learning out there that can be quantified and brought together to make this more attractive in general.
Thank you, Lee. And finally, Mark.
Three very quick things for me. Firstly, really encouraged actually at the intentionality in the figures around those 67% that had cohesion as their primary objective in some of their work, because I wouldn't have expected that. That was really encouraging. That still means we've got a journey to take, but that's really positive. Second thing, which I think is really helpful to the community of practice that's looking at the power of sport, is the range of needs within that set that was asking about things like access to partnerships. I don't think there is a single thing that the sector needs to be effective around this, so we need to work on that. And the access to local partnerships is something that came through our network survey really strongly. And then the third thing, I'm going to bang a drum that Hitesh has heard me bang before, which is the point about collective impacts is absolutely right, but we are responsible for that. That's not the responsibility of anybody else other than the individual organisations on this call. And sometimes we're so busy, understandably, trying to make the case for our own work, we don't pay enough attention to doing things collectively. So it's just a plea. Made it before, I'm probably going to make it again. Let's do this thing together. We need to be working similarly around data collection and presentation.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Joe.
I think and I think that's something that actually a network like Belong can provide, because we are a network and we're a membership organisation, and we kind of advocate collectively for this work and the importance of this work across our membership. So it's certainly kind of a role that that we play in terms of advocating for the importance of this work. So just a huge thanks to our final panel, and I'm sorry that I've pressed you and harried you through. Apologies for that, but we kind of slightly kind of suffered from being the last panel, and there were such great presentations before us, so and we ran slightly over time, so thank you for that. If you want to find out more about Belong's work, please do join up to our network, join up as members, where you'll get support and advice and research and toolkits and resources to help you do your work. We've got a great conference coming up on the 15th of November, so please do sign up to that. And thank you so much to all of our fantastic speakers, and a big shout out to the Belong team. We're a very small team behind the scenes, and a big shout out to the team at Belong for doing such a great job of pulling this together and making it happen. So thanks everybody, and have a brilliant afternoon.